everyone. Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be really getting into it with sustainable procurement, not just, the surface level stuff.
Yeah, we're going beyond the buzzwords today.
For sure. So you're listening to this. You probably already get why sustainability is a big deal, but
It's about how companies are actually putting it into practice.
exactly. And that's where our friends over at Procure4 Marketing come in. They just dropped this article, right? And it really lays out why sustainable procurement isn't just a nice thing to do.
It's about smart business.
Totally. They actually make the case that it can give you a competitive advantage, which I'm really curious to unpack later.
Yeah, that was a fascinating part of the article for sure.
So before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's really nail down what we mean by sustainable procurement.
Right, because it can mean different things to different people.
Totally. But this article does a really good job of going beyond the eco jargon and giving us a concrete definition.
They talk about considering the environmental, social, and economic impact of, well, everything, from the moment a raw material is sourced to when the final product is.
Gone. What happens at the end of its life, right?
Exactly, the whole life cycle.
It's that saying, it's about the journey, not the destination. Well, this is the product's journey.
And every step of the way has an impact.
Okay, so to make this a little less abstract, give me an example.
Okay, so let's say you're buying paper. Sustainable procurement isn't just about buying recycled paper.
Right, because even that can be kind of murky. Where did it come from? How was it processed?
Yeah, gotta ask. Where and how was it recycled? What were the working conditions at the recycling plant? And can this paper, easily be recycled again?
It's like a whole rabbit hole. You start pulling on one thread and
And it just keeps going.
Yeah.
It makes you realize that every little choice has these, ripple effects.
Okay, so we're talking about a real deep dive here, not just swapping out your light bulbs. This is about how businesses operate on, a core level.
And I think the reason this is so important right now is that consumers are getting a lot more aware,
And they're demanding more.
Absolutely. Consumers want transparency. They want to know where their stuff comes from, how it's made.
And they want to know that businesses are taking these global challenges seriously. I mean, let's be real. Climate change, resource scarcity, these are real things.
It's not just about being green anymore. It's about survival for a lot of businesses and for the planet.
Okay, so then how does that translate into a competitive edge? Because that's what really jumped out at me in the article.
Well, if you're doing all of this, if you're sourcing responsibly, treating your workers fairly, minimizing your environmental impacts.
You're mitigating risk?
Exactly. And you're building trust with consumers who care about those things, which is a growing market share, by the way.
And I'm guessing you're probably saving money in the long run, too.
You got it. Less waste, greater efficiency.
Ah.
It all adds up.
Okay, so let's break this down even further. The article talks about these 3 pillars of sustainable procurement: environmental, social, and economic. So let's start with the environmental piece, because honestly, that's what usually comes to mind first, right?
And it is a big piece. Minimizing your footprint every step of the way. Sourcing materials responsibly, reducing waste and emissions during manufacturing, transportation.
So it's not just about using less plastic packaging.
It's about the whole picture. Choosing locally sourced materials over something that has to be shipped halfway across the world.
And what about after the product's made?
That's huge too. How is it packaged? What happens to it at the end of its life cycle? Can it be recycled, reused? These are all questions businesses need to be asking.
Okay, so we've talked about the environment. What about the social pillar? Because I feel like that one sometimes flies under the radar.
Oh, it's just as important. This is about ethical labor practices.
Yeah.
We're talking fair wages, safe working conditions, and respecting human rights throughout the entire supply chain.
So it's about making sure that everyone involved in creating and delivering a product is treated fairly.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just individual workers. This also ties into how businesses are impacting the communities where they operate.
Are you sourcing from suppliers who support their local communities, things like that?
Yes, it's about aligning your business practices with your values.
Okay, so we've got the environmental and social pillars. Now, the third one is economic, which might seem a little counterintuitive. I mean, people tend to associate sustainability with higher costs. So how does sustainable procurement actually lead to economic benefits?
Right, because at first glance, it might seem like it's going to be more expensive.
Right, like you're paying more for recycled materials or whatever.
Exactly. But the thing is, sustainable procurement is really about the long game. It's about shifting your mindset from short-term cost-cutting to long-term investment.
So instead of just focusing on the cheapest supplier, you're thinking about the bigger picture.
Yes. What are the environmental costs that aren't factored into that cheap price tag? What about the potential costs of, say, social or environmental damage down the line?
So you might pay a little more upfront, but
But you could save a lot in the long run. And it's not just about cost savings. It's about creating a more resilient business that can weather future storms.
okay, so we've laid the foundation. We know what sustainable procurement is, and we're starting to get into the why. But how do businesses actually put these principles into action? That's what we'll explore after the break. So how do we actually do this? Where do companies even start with sustainable procurement?
Well, it's like anything else. You need a plan. The article calls this your procurement policy.
So like a set of guidelines, right, to make sure everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, exactly. It outlines your commitment to sustainability and helps you make sure all your purchasing decisions are, aligned with that.
Okay, so it's not just about saying you care about the environment.
It's about actually putting systems in place to make it happen.
So where do those three pillars we talked about fit into all of this?
They're at the core of it, really. Your procurement policy should reflect your priorities, right? So maybe you're really focused on minimizing your carbon footprint, or maybe ethical labor practices are your top priority.
And how does this translate for someone like me who's not writing up procurement policies?
Well, it's about being an informed consumer, right? Don't be afraid to ask businesses about their practices. What are they doing to be more sustainable?
Support the companies that are actually walking the walk.
Exactly. Look for transparency. If a company is proud of the work they're doing, they'll want to share it.
Okay, so you've got your procurement policy, you're being transparent. What's next?
Well, then it comes down to choosing the right suppliers. Because you can have the best policy in the world, but if you're working with suppliers who don't share your values,
It's all for nothing.
pretty much. So you really want to take the time to vet potential suppliers. Make sure their practices are aligned with yours.
And I'm guessing this means looking beyond just the bottom line.
You got it. Because the cheapest option isn't always the most sustainable option.
And that's where things can get trickery, right? Because maybe you're a smaller business, you don't have a ton of leverage to influence a supplier's practices.
Absolutely. But that's why the article emphasizes collaboration. You can, with your suppliers, share your expertise, maybe offer incentives for them to adopt more sustainable practices.
So it becomes more of a partnership.
Exactly. You're both working towards the same goal.
Yeah.
And don't underestimate the power of collective action. When businesses come together and demand more sustainable options, suppliers take notice.
And we as consumers have a role to play in that too.
100%. Every time you choose to spend your money with a company that aligns with your values, you're sending a message.
So we've crafted our policy, we're being choosy about our suppliers. How do we actually measure if this stuff is working? The article mentioned something called life cycle analysis. Is that as complicated as it sounds?
It's actually pretty simple. Imagine you're tracing the journey of a product from start to finish. Like literally from the moment those raw materials are extracted from the earth to when the final product ends up.
Yeah.
Well, wherever it ends up.
The landfill? Hopefully not.
Hopefully not. But the point is, you're looking at the entire life cycle of the product.
And what's the benefit of doing that?
It helps you make more informed decisions. Because sometimes something that seems more sustainable on the surface might actually have hidden impacts.
Give me an example.
Okay, so let's say you're a clothing company.
Yeah.
And you're trying to decide between organic cotton and recycled polyester for your t-shirts.
Okay, tough choice already.
Right. So at first glance, recycled polyester seems like the more sustainable choice because you're using existing materials.
Reducing waste, right?
Exactly. But then you start to dig deeper and you realize that the process of recycling polyester can actually release harmful microplastics.
Oh no, I didn't think about that.
Right. And then there's the question of where these materials are coming from. What's the carbon footprint of shipping them around the world?
So it's not always as straightforward as it seems.
Exactly. And that's where life cycle analysis can be really helpful. It helps you see the bigger picture, understand the potential trade-offs, and make the most sustainable choice possible.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. And I gotta say, sustainable procurement, it sounds amazing in theory, but like, is it really doable, out in the real world?
It's a fair question because, like any big shift, it comes with its own set of challenges.
Okay, good. I'm glad it's not just me. Because honestly, sometimes it feels like we're talking about this ideal world where companies have unlimited budgets and access to like magical suppliers who do everything right.
Well, the article definitely acknowledges those real-world constraints.
So let's talk about the big one, the one everyone's thinking about, cost. Because, and maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like eco-friendly often comes with a higher price tag, right?
It's true that sometimes sustainable options might have a higher upfront cost. But the key is, and this is what sustainable procurement pushes us to do, to think long term.
Right. Like we were saying earlier about investing in energy efficiency. Yeah, it might cost more upfront, but
You save money in the long run because you're
yeah.
reducing your energy consumption so your bills go down.
Mhm.
Plus, you're less vulnerable to like fluctuating energy prices.
And then there are those hidden costs we talked about.
Exactly. The environmental and social impacts that don't show up on a price tag, those can come back to bite you later on.
Okay, that makes sense. But let's say you're on board with that, you're willing to invest a little more upfront. How do you even find these sustainable suppliers? Is that another hurdle?
Yeah, availability can definitely be a challenge. It depends on your industry, your location. It's not always easy.
Especially if you're a smaller business, you might not have the same kind of pull as a big corporation to be like, hey, you need to meet these standards.
Totally. And that's where, again, the article highlights the importance of collaboration. Businesses can connect with each other, share information about suppliers, even team up to create more demand for sustainable options.
So it's like instead of competing on who can find the cheapest supplier, you're actually working together to raise the bar for everyone.
Exactly. It's about creating a more sustainable marketplace as a collective.
I love that. And it goes back to what we were saying about consumer power, too.
Absolutely. Because when businesses see that there's real demand for sustainable products, that's when they're going to make those changes.
Okay, so you found your sustainable suppliers, you're doing your best, but how do you actually prove it? Like, how do you know it's working, and how do you communicate that to your customers? I feel like greenwashing is a big concern these days.
Oh, for sure. And that's why transparency is so crucial. The article talks about using things like sustainability scorecards and life cycle assessments.
Okay, so break that down for me. What does that actually look like? So it's about setting clear metrics and then tracking your progress. Like,
Okay.
how much waste are you devoting from landfills? What's the carbon footprint of your supply chain?
So you're not just saying, hey, we're sustainable.
No.
You're actually backing it up with data.
Yes. And that data allows you to see where you're making progress and where you need to improve. And it gives you credibility with consumers who are rightfully skeptical of vague claims.
This has been such a great conversation. It really feels like sustainable procurement is about so much more than just checking boxes.
It really is. It's about changing the way we do business, changing the way we think about our impact on the world.
It's about creating a future where hopefully sustainability isn't something we have to strive for. It's just the way things are.
Exactly. It's about building a more just and equitable world, one purchase order at a time.
I love that.
Yeah.
On that note, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.